I was bedridden with a fever so high that I couldn't even move. I asked my oldest son to bring me a glass of water. I thought he would at least do that for me, but instead, he came back with a glass of beer. To my shock, he splashed the beer all over me while I lay helpless in bed, burning up with fever. From the doorway, I heard a burst of laughter, and there she was, my daughter-in-law, clapping her hands and laughing along with him. My son stood there too, laughing, still holding the empty glass. I could hardly believe what was happening. Despite my fever and confusion, the scene burned clearly into my memory. "Clean the house before we get back, okay?" they said before leaving. Up until that moment, I had put up with all the selfishness from my son Riker and his wife, but this was the breaking point for me. I couldn't take it anymore. "Yes, I'll clean it," I answered, forcing the words through the pain in my throat, loud enough for them to hear as they left the house. My name is Sloane, and I'm a 71-year-old woman. I've been a housewife for most of my life. My husband, Holden, is 73 years old. Since retiring, he's been teaching calligraphy to kids at a local community center. Holden had practiced calligraphy since he was a young man, and it was always his dream to teach it once he retired. Seeing him so happy, smiling as he heads off to the center every day, brings me joy. We have 2 sons. Our younger son is married and has 2 children in elementary school. But our older son, who's 42 years old, still lives at home with us, unmarried. At least until recently. He works part-time at a convenience store at night, but only about 4 days a week. He doesn't help financially or contribute to the household at all. He's been living a lazy life, and both Holden and I have talked to him countless times, hoping he'd change, but nothing ever worked. At least he's not gambling or getting into debt, but over time, Holden and I just gave up nagging him. Then, out of nowhere, one day, our oldest son announced that he got married. He brought his wife home without any prior warning. She walked into our home as if it was the most natural thing in the world. From that moment on, I had to cook and clean for her too. At first, I didn't mind making meals for her, but it quickly became clear she wasn't planning to lift a finger to help around the house. She wouldn't even clean up after meals, and she never said thank you. Worse, she'd demand things like coffee after dinner, treating me more like a maid than her mother-in-law. Holden couldn't stand to watch it any longer. He spoke up, scolding our son and his wife for their rude behavior. After that, they stopped asking for outrageous things, at least when Holden was around. But as soon as he was out of sight, my daughter-in-law resumed her demands. "Mother-in-law, please take this dress to the cleaners for me," she'd say. I thought her requests were over the top, and when I finally said something about it, my son took her side. "It's just a small errand you can do while you're out shopping." "Why are you being so stingy?" he said, defending her. It hurt to hear him talk to me like that, especially when neither of them was contributing to the household in any way. We were feeding and housing them for free, and they had the nerve to ask for more? I thought about telling Holden, but I didn't want to cause a big argument between him and our son. So, once again, I held my tongue and took her clothes to the cleaners as she asked. Usually, Holden and I visit our younger son's family in Canada twice a year. We were getting ready for another visit soon since a week-long holiday was coming up. We always looked forward to these trips. Our grandchildren had become very attached to us, and we loved spending time with them. We had already bought toys for them as gifts, and I was planning to pick up a special roll cake on our way there. When we visit, we often take the sleeper train instead of flying. The train ride gives us a chance to relax and enjoy the scenery, something you can't do from a plane. Now that we're both retired, we have the time to savor the journey. The day before our trip, I was unusually excited. After seeing Holden off to his calligraphy class, I went shopping to pick up a few last-minute things. I even stopped by a cake shop to buy some handmade cookies for the grandkids, thinking they'd last longer than the cake. As I headed home, thinking about the smiles on my grandchildren's faces, it started to rain. At first, it was just a drizzle, but soon the rain got heavier. I rushed to get home, but I ended up stopping at a convenience store to buy an umbrella. By the time I got there, though, I was already drenched from head to toe. I thought about waiting out the rain at the convenience store, but since I didn't know when it would stop and I wanted to warm up in a hot bath, I bought an umbrella and rushed home. As soon as I stepped through the door and was about to run myself a bath, my daughter-in-law appeared and said, "Sloan, are you about to take a bath? I need to go out, so let me use the bath first." "Oh, and can you start dinner early?" Without waiting for an answer, she shut the bathroom door behind her. It wasn't even her house, yet she acted like she owned it. I changed into dry clothes and started preparing dinner, trying my best to ignore her. While I was cooking, I began to sneeze. I knew it would be terrible to catch a cold the day before our trip, but I couldn't help it. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law spent over an hour in the bathroom, lounging in the bath while I felt my body growing colder. The next morning, the day we were supposed to visit our younger son and his family, I woke up feeling absolutely terrible. My throat was sore, my nose was running, and when I checked my temperature, it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Sure enough, I had caught a cold from yesterday's rain. I told Holden that he should go to Canada without me because I didn't want to risk passing my cold on to our grandchildren. Holden suggested that we cancel the trip, but since we had already bought the sleeper train tickets and because we had gifts ready for the kids, I insisted he go on his own. I handed him the cookies I had bought the day before and reassured him that it was just a minor cold and that I would be fine after resting and taking some medicine. Before he left, Holden spoke to our eldest son and his wife. He told them I wasn't feeling well and made them promise to help with the housework while he was gone. After waving goodbye to Holden, I was about to crawl back into bed when I overheard my son and his wife talking. "Oh, what a hassle. It's just a cold, right? But at least now that Dad's gone, we can relax," I heard them say. I was stunned. How could they be so ungrateful when they were living in our house, without paying a single bill? Yet this was typical behavior from them. You know the only reason you're able to live like this is because of your father, right? I finally confronted them, unable to stay silent any longer. Riker and his wife didn't take kindly to my words. My son snapped back, "We're doing you a favor by staying with you in your old age." "Yeah, most people don't want to live with their in-laws," his wife added, as if she had forgotten they were the ones who moved in with us uninvited. It was ironic, really, that they acted like they were doing us a huge favor when it was clearly the other way around. Feeling miserable and too tired to argue, I dragged myself back to bed, hoping to get some rest. Later that evening, though, my daughter-in-law barged into my room and woke me up. "Mother-in-law, you're not planning on skipping dinner just because you're a little sick, are you? You know I can't cook." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A grown woman, 33 years old, telling her sick mother-in-law to cook just because she didn't know how to? I was too weak to argue and just wanted to rest. I wished Holden had warned them more sternly before he left that morning. Still, I forced myself to ignore her and try to go back to sleep. But my daughter-in-law wouldn't leave until I dragged myself out of bed to make something for them to eat. In the kitchen, I started preparing a simple meal. As I worked, Riker came home, barely acknowledging me even though I was visibly sick, wearing a mask. He acted as if everything was perfectly normal. Without a second thought, he demanded, "Hey, the bath isn't ready yet." They didn't care whether I was ill or not. I knew there was no point in arguing with them, so I finished making dinner as quickly as I could and prepared the bath afterward. When I returned to the living room, Riker and his wife were happily chatting away as they ate the meal I had just cooked. Between bites, my daughter-in-law casually mentioned, "We're going on a trip abroad the day after tomorrow, so don't get us sick with your cold." I was shocked. They hadn't said a word about planning a trip, let alone one abroad. Apparently, they were taking 3 weeks off to travel around Europe, and Riker had taken time off from his part-time job for it. While I was surprised, I was also relieved. At least they wouldn't be home for the next 3 weeks. The morning of their departure, my condition had worsened. My fever had spiked to nearly 103 degrees Fahrenheit, and I felt so weak that I couldn't get out of bed. My head pounded, and I was desperately thirsty, but I couldn't even lift myself to get a drink. Just then, Riker came into my room. Without a hint of concern, he said, "Hey, make us some food. You can still cook, even if you have a cold." I couldn't hold back my tears as I lay there, my own son demanding that I cook for him when I was too ill to even move. "Eat out," I muttered through my tears, finally too exhausted to care anymore. I was lying in bed, feeling weak and burning up with a high fever. I could barely move, So I asked my oldest son to bring me a glass of water, hoping he would help me in my time of need. But instead of water, he came back with a glass of beer. To my shock, he didn't hand it to me. He threw it all over me while I lay there helpless. I was soaked and stunned. From the doorway, I heard laughing, and when I looked, my daughter-in-law was standing there, clapping her hands and laughing right along with him. My son, still holding the empty glass, was laughing too. I was feverish and confused, but that moment was seared into my mind as clear as day. Before they left, they casually said, "Make sure to clean the house before we get back, okay?" That was the last straw. I had endured enough of Riker and his wife's selfish behavior, but this was too much. Forcing myself to speak through the pain in my throat, I said, "Yes, I'll clean it," loud enough so they could hear me as they walked out. My name is Sloane, and I'm a 71-year-old housewife. My husband, Holden, is 73 and retired. Since he stopped working, he's been teaching calligraphy to children at the local community center. He's been passionate about calligraphy since he was young, and it was always his dream to teach it once he retired. Seeing him so happy heading to the community center every day with a smile makes me happy too. We have 2 sons. Our younger son is married and has 2 wonderful children who are still in elementary school. But our eldest, Riker, who's now 42, still lives with us. Up until recently, he wasn't married, and even though he works part-time at a convenience store, it's only about 4 days a week. He doesn't contribute to the household financially or otherwise and spends most of his time lazing around. Holden and I have had countless talks with him about his lack of responsibility, but nothing ever changed. At least he wasn't gambling or in debt, so after a while, we stopped nagging him. Then, out of nowhere, one day, Riker suddenly announced that he got married. He brought his wife home without any warning, and she moved in as if it was the most natural thing in the world. From that day on, I had another person to take care of. At first, I didn't mind cooking for my new daughter-in-law, but I quickly realized she had no intention of helping out around the house. She wouldn't even clean up after herself, and not once did she say thank you for the meals I prepared. Instead, she began making demands, like asking me to serve her coffee after dinner, as if I were a maid. Holden couldn't stand seeing this anymore. He confronted Riker and his wife, scolding them for their rudeness. After that, they stopped making unreasonable demands, at least when Holden was around. But as soon as he wasn't there, my daughter-in-law went back to her usual ways. "Mother-in-law, can you take this dress to the cleaners for me?" she'd ask, every time acting like it was a favor I should be happy to do. I finally got fed up and told her she was being too selfish. But when I did, Riker took her side. "Why are you being so stingy, Mom? It's just something you can do while you're out shopping," he said, defending her. It hurt to hear him say that, especially since neither of them contributed anything to the household, yet they were living off of us for free. I thought about telling Holden about it, but I didn't want to stir up trouble between him and Riker. So, once again, I bit my tongue and took her clothes to the cleaners. Holden and I usually visit our younger son's family in Canada twice a year, and we were planning another trip soon because a week-long holiday was coming up. We love these trips, and our grandchildren have grown quite close to us. We had already bought some toys as gifts for them, and I was planning to pick up a special roll cake for the family on our way. We usually take the sleeper train when we visit them, rather than flying. The train ride is relaxing, and we enjoy the scenic views. Now that we're both retired, we have time to appreciate these little moments. The day before the trip, I was feeling unusually excited. After Holden left for his calligraphy class, I went out to do some last-minute shopping. While I was out, I stopped by a cake shop and bought some handmade cookies for the grandkids, thinking they'd last longer than the roll cake I had planned to buy. On my way home, I couldn't help but think about how excited our grandchildren would be to see us. But as I was walking back, the weather took a turn, and it started to drizzle. The drizzle quickly turned into heavier rain, and I found myself hurrying to get home. I decided to stop by a nearby convenience store to buy an umbrella. By the time I got there, though, I was already soaked through, my clothes clinging to my skin. I was cold and tired when I finally got home, hoping to warm up with a nice bath. But just as I was about to take one, my daughter-in-law popped up out of nowhere. "Sloane, are you about to take a bath?" I need to go out now, so let me use it first, she said, not waiting for my response before shutting the bathroom door. Then she added, "Oh, and can you start dinner early?" This was my life now, and all I could do was change into dry clothes and start making dinner. The phone rang, and it was from the carpenter, a good friend of Holden's. He's about 58 years old and serves as the site supervisor for our new house. We hurried over to meet him. He gave us a tour of the house, explaining every detail of the layout. We had designed the house to be a single-story, fully accessible home, keeping our future in mind as we aged. As we walked through, I was blown away by how beautiful the house turned out, even better than I had imagined. I could already picture us living there, enjoying our retirement. Some furniture that had been left in the living room was moved by the carpenters. When I thanked them, they simply smiled and said, "It's no problem. Holden helped us out a lot back in the day, so this is nothing." And with that, Holden and I moved into our new home. It was more comfortable than we could have ever dreamed, and for the first time in a long time, our lives were peaceful. Without our eldest son, Riker, and his wife around, we could finally relax. However, about a month after settling in, the peace was shattered. One day, without any warning, our son and his wife showed up at our new house. We hadn't told them where we'd moved, and we were certain our younger son, Grady, hadn't either. It seemed they had hired a private investigator to track us down. "Hey, it's not fair that you sold the old house, threw away our stuff, and moved into this nice place without us. I'm your eldest son, so I have the right to live here too, don't I?" Riker demanded, glaring at us while holding large bags, clearly intending to move in. We were stunned. We had hoped to cut ties with them, but here they were, standing on our doorstep, determined to invade our lives once again. At that moment, Grady came around the corner from the back of the house. "What are you two doing here? Come to cause more trouble?" he asked, disbelief written all over his face. His wife and their 2 children, Delaney and Weston, were with him. They had come to visit us for a week, to see the new house and spend time together. They had just returned from a quick trip to the nearby convenience store. "Who are they? Are they bad people?" asked Delaney, our sweet 5th grader, her innocent voice cutting through the tension. Holden, who had been about to shut the door on Riker and his wife, suddenly had an idea. "While Grady's family is staying with us for the week, you two can stay here as well. But let me be clear, this is temporary. I won't allow you to squat here indefinitely," he said firmly. Reluctantly, we welcomed everyone into the house. But almost immediately, Riker and his wife flopped onto the sofa in the living room, acting as if they belonged there. "Mother-in-law, can I have some coffee?" "I'll take mine black," Riker's wife said nonchalantly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Grady's wife was shocked at the audacity of the request. Before she could react, the grandchildren jumped in. "Why can't you make it yourself? You're grown-ups." "Even I can pour my own juice," Delaney said, her wide eyes looking from Riker to his wife. Their innocent comments made Riker's wife visibly uncomfortable, and she finally got up to make her own coffee. But the children weren't finished. "Why don't you cook?" "My mom cooks all the time," Weston chimed in. "Why don't you clean up after yourself?" "Dad, and I always clean up our plates when we're done eating," Delaney added. Grady's children were well-behaved and responsible, thanks to the good upbringing they received from their parents. It must have been baffling for them to see 2 grown adults who couldn't even manage simple tasks like making coffee or cleaning up after themselves. At first, Riker and his wife tried to argue back, but the kids' questions never stopped. By the end of the week, they were completely worn out from the constant barrage of why questions. Riker's wife, in particular, seemed upset that the kids kept calling her Auntie. "Don't call me Auntie," she said, clearly annoyed. "But why not? You are our auntie, aren't you?" "You're too old to be called sister," Delaney replied innocently. The Riker hit her hard, and even Grady and I, overhearing the exchange, couldn't help but chuckle. After Grady and his family left, we finally sent Riker and his wife packing as well. They were so exhausted from the children's endless questioning that they didn't put up much resistance. It was a relief to get them out of our home. A few months later, we received a message from Riker asking, "Can you lend us some money?" We couldn't believe it. They had lived off us for years, staying in our home and eating our food without contributing a penny. Riker's part-time job at the convenience store had been enough to cover his basic expenses, but now that they were on their own, they were clearly struggling to make ends meet. His wife still had no intention of working, and they were spending money like they had it to spare, which they didn't. We refused their request, telling them, "We will not lend you money now or in the future." After that, we blocked Riker's number. A few days later, while Holden and I were out, we got a call from our home security company. There had been an intruder in our house. When they sent us the video footage, we were stunned to see that it was Riker and his wife trying to break into our home through a window. It was pitiful. They had resorted to trying to steal from us because they were broke. At least they hadn't caused harm to anyone else, but it didn't make the situation any less heartbreaking. Security caught them in the act, and they were handed over to the police. Although they were released because they were family, they were given a stern warning. Since then, we haven't heard from them. They stopped trying to force their way into our home, and we've blocked all their calls. Grady also received a request for money from Riker, but like us, he refused. Riker had apparently borrowed money from loan sharks and was now on the run because he couldn't pay it back. "You made your choices. Pay back the money yourself," Grady told him before blocking his number too. We don't know what became of Riker and his wife after that. We chose to move on, cutting ties with the people who once threw beer on me while I was sick in bed. Without them in our lives, Holden and I are enjoying the peace we've long deserved. Now, Holden teaches calligraphy at home in a special room we designed just for him. When Grady's family comes to visit, the grandchildren join other kids in taking calligraphy classes, making new friends, and having a great time. I am so thankful for these peaceful days, and I make sure to savor every moment.